You know, we talk so much about love like it's a lottery, like if we're lucky, someone will finally show up and choose us. But here's the truth you've been avoiding. You don't find your person by waiting, you find them by becoming someone who refuses to settle for crumbs disguised as connection. The real challenge isn't that the right person isn't out there. It's that you keep negotiating with your loneliness, you keep shrinking your standards, you keep telling yourself you're too much, just because someone else couldn't meet you at your level. And today, I want you to step into a different kind of knowing, the kind where you stop chasing people who only offer potential and you start recognizing the power of walking away from almost. You deserve real, aligned, grounded, soul-level love, but you will never receive it unless you raise the standard of how you allow people to treat you. So let's talk about how to find your person without ever settling for less than what matches the depth of who you are. So many people convince themselves they've found something meaningful simply because they feel a strong pull towards someone. But that pull isn't always love, and it's definitely not always alignment. Most of the time, that intensity you feel is coming from an unmet need, an old wound, or a familiar pattern your nervous system keeps mistaking for connection. And until you learn to tell the difference, you'll keep choosing people who activate your anxiety instead of people who honor your peace. Attachment feels urgent, it feels desperate, it feels like, oh, I don't want to lose them. Even when they aren't actually giving you anything worth holding on to. You cling because you fear emptiness, not because the relationship itself is full. Attachment makes you work harder for someone's presence, instead of asking whether their presence even deserves that effort. It makes you tolerate behavior that goes against your values because you're afraid that if this person leaves, you won't find anything better. It convinces you that scarcity is reality and settling is survival. Alignment, on the other hand, is calm, it's steady. It's the feeling of being seen, not just wanted. It's not about intensity, it's about clarity. When someone is aligned with you, their actions don't contradict their words. Their energy doesn't confuse your nervous system. Their presence doesn't feel like a high followed by a crash, it feels like breathing. With alignment, you're not begging for effort, connection, or honesty. It's offered without you having to ask. But the reason people confuse the two is because attachment is familiar. If you grew up earning love, you will confuse effort with affection. If you grew up being dismissed, you will confuse inconsistency with passion. If you grew up seen only conditionally, you will confuse emotional hunger with emotional connection. And that's why breaking this pattern requires self-awareness. You can't find your person until you understand what your patterns keep pulling you toward. Most relationships fail not because people didn't love each other, but because they weren't aligned in values, capacity, or emotional maturity. You can be deeply attached to someone who is entirely wrong for your future. You can miss someone who is destroying your confidence. You can want someone who cannot show up for you. That desire doesn't make the relationship right. It just makes the pattern strong. And this is why you must learn to ask deeper questions than, do I feel something for them? Feelings are not the measurement. Alignment asks, does this relationship make me more of myself or less? Does it bring peace or chaos? Does it support my growth or shrink it? Your person, the one who truly matches your life, will never require you to abandon yourself to keep them. They won't need you to betray your intuition, silence your needs, or minimize your worth. Alignment is when both people choose each other from fullness, not fear. And the moment you start recognizing the difference between emotional intensity and emotional health, you stop falling for temporary highs and start seeking long-term stability. The truth is, attachment can feel like destiny, but alignment lives like it. Attachment consumes you, but alignment supports you. Attachment is loud, but alignment is steady. And the day you stop chasing the rush of attachment and start choosing the groundedness of alignment, everything about the way you love and the way you allow yourself to be loved begins to change. When your standards are built from fear, they will always work against you. Fear-based standards sound like, I'll accept whatever I can get. I don't want to be alone. Or, I'm scared I won't find anyone better. They make you operate from a mindset of scarcity, where you think love is limited and you must grab whoever shows you even the slightest bit of interest. And when you make decisions from fear, you don't choose partners, you cling to them. You don't evaluate compatibility, you settle for convenience. You don't ask, is this right for me? You ask, what if this is the last chance I get? This is exactly where so many people lose themselves. They confuse proximity with value. Someone shows up, gives them attention, throws a little affection their way, and suddenly that becomes enough. But attention is not effort. Presence is not partnership. And fear will have you convincing yourself that the bare minimum is acceptable simply because it stretches your loneliness for a little while. When your standards come from fear, you allow things you would never accept if you believed you deserved more. You justify inconsistency as they're just busy. You label emotional unavailability as they're guarded. You call disrespect miscommunication. You tolerate mixed signals, half love and almost relationships because the fear of losing something, even something unhealthy, feels worse than the idea of starting over. And what fear ultimately teaches you is that pain is familiar, but peace is unpredictable. So you pick familiar, but raising your standards from self-worth changes everything. Self-worth says, I'm not afraid to be alone because I know what I bring. Losing someone who can't love me fully is not a loss. Self-worth says, I don't chase love, I choose love. When your standards come from self-worth, you stop negotiating with your own needs and you start evaluating whether someone's presence aligns with your emotional, spiritual, and relational values. Self-worth builds standards that protect your heart, not your fear. You begin to recognize the difference between temporary chemistry and long-term compatibility. You understand that someone liking you isn't enough. They need to respect you. Match your effort, communicate with maturity, and show consistency when emotions aren't convenient. You stop romanticizing potential and start measuring reality. You stop begging for clarity and start expecting honesty. You stop shrinking yourself just to keep the peace and start choosing relationships where your fullness is welcomed, not tolerated. And here's the most liberating shift: when your standards rise, your relationships become easier, not harder. People who aren't meant for you simply fall away because they can't meet you at the level of your growth. They can't manipulate you with mixed signals. They can't keep you around with temporary kindness. They can't breadcrumb you into compliance because you no longer settle for scraps. When your standards rise, your energy becomes selective, and only people who are capable of real love stay in your orbit. But for this shift to happen, you must confront the deeper truth. Fear-based standards aren't accidental. They're learned. Maybe you grew up believing you had to earn love. Maybe you dated people who made you feel replaceable. Maybe you were taught that being chosen matters more than choosing wisely. So you lowered your standards thinking that would make love easier. Instead, it made heartbreak predictable. Raising your standards requires unlearning everything that taught you to settle. It requires asking yourself, if I fully valued myself, would I allow this? It requires separating your desire for connection from your need for approval. It requires believing that being alone temporarily is better than being attached to someone who empties you continuously. And it requires recognizing that real love doesn't require you to sacrifice respect, dignity, boundaries, or peace. When your standards come from self-worth, you stop fearing that love will pass you by. You realize love isn't scarce at all. What's scarce is people willing to choose you with the same depth and honesty you're willing to offer. And once you raise your standards to match your worth, those are the only people who will ever reach you. So many people spend their lives chasing love, chasing attention, chasing validation, chasing someone who finally makes them feel chosen. And the tragedy is that in all that chasing, they never pause long enough to ask themselves a simple question. Why am I running after what's not running toward me? When you chase, you automatically place yourself in a position of lack. You send the message, not just to others, but to yourself, that you are incomplete without someone's presence. And the moment you do that, you lower your value in your own eyes. That becomes the first step towards settling. Chasing always comes from a void. You chase because you want love to fill something inside you that you haven't healed. You chase because silence makes you anxious. You chase because attention feels like oxygen and you panic when it fades. You chase because you believe that if you just try harder, text more, prove more, give more, maybe the other person will finally appreciate you. But that mindset is rooted in desperation, not connection. You can never build a healthy relationship by running after someone who's walking away from you. Attraction works differently. Attraction isn't about convincing someone to choose you. It's about creating a life so grounded, so aligned, and so fulfilling that the right people naturally gravitate toward you. When your life is full, you don't chase, you radiate. You don't beg, you inspire. You don't cling, you choose with clarity. When you build a life that attracts, you stop focusing on how to be liked and start focusing on how to be aligned. You invest in your growth, your peace, your purpose, your passions, your inner world, and that energy draws in the kind of love that recognizes your value without you having to explain it. The most magnetic people aren't the ones trying the hardest. They're the ones who are deeply present in their own lives. They know who they are. They know what they want. They're not afraid of being alone because their life is already rich, meaningful, and full of self-respect. When you prioritize building this kind of life, your relationships shift dramatically. You stop depending on someone else to give your life meaning. You stop mistaking attention for affection. You stop tolerating inconsistency because you no longer need someone to make you feel worthy. Building a life that attracts also means you're not waiting for love to save you. You're creating stability for yourself, emotionally, mentally, spiritually, financially, socially. You're learning to be enough for yourself. And in doing so, you raise the quality of people who even have access to you. When your life is grounded in purpose, you naturally filter out people who don't have direction. When your life is filled with peace, chaotic people avoid you because they can't thrive in your atmosphere. When your life is built on self-worth, you repel those who rely on your insecurity to keep you small. The right person can only recognize you when you're aligned with your true self, not when you're lost in the identity you created just to be chosen. That's why chasing never works long term. Chasing forces you to shift into something you think someone else will like. Attraction lets you be fully yourself and still be loved. Attraction says, I am enough, and the partner who resonates with who I am will find me. That confidence is magnetic because it signals that you don't need saving. You're looking for partnership, not rescue. And here's the beautiful part: when you stop chasing, you stop wasting energy on people who are not meant for you. You stop forcing connections that drain you. You stop trying to create a future with people who don't even know what they want tomorrow. Instead, you begin recognizing who naturally moves toward your energy, who matches your effort, your emotional availability, your values, your maturity. This shift creates space for healthy love to enter, not the kind you have to pull out of someone, not the kind you beg for, not the kind you compromise your self-worth for, but the kind that flows naturally toward you because your life is already aligned with peace, purpose, and growth. When you build a life that attracts, you don't chase love. You welcome it. You recognize it, and you choose it with confidence, not fear. Almost love is one of the most dangerous places a heart can get stuck in. It's not toxic enough to break you instantly, but it's not healthy enough to build anything real either. It gives you just enough to hope, but never enough to feel secure. And that's what makes it addictive. It feeds you in crumbs, leaving you starving but still waiting at the same table. Walking away from almost isn't hard because you don't see the truth. It's hard because you keep convincing yourself it will eventually become something it never can. Almost feels like potential. Almost feels like if we just try a little harder. Almost feels like maybe tomorrow. But tomorrow never comes. The person who almost chooses you won't suddenly wake up one day with the capacity they've never had. The relationship that almost meets your needs won't magically evolve into the partnership you dream of. The conversations that almost give you clarity won't turn into consistency. Almost is the emotional limbo that keeps you suspended between wanting more and receiving less. You cling to almost because it gives you just enough validation to stay hopeful. They text you, but only when it's convenient. They show affection, but only when they feel lonely. They show interest, but never commitment. And each small moment of attention tricks your heart into thinking, see, this could work. But it never actually does, because the foundation is empty. You're building a future with maybes instead of certainties. Walking away from almost is painful because it forces you to face the truth you've been avoiding. You weren't waiting for them. You were waiting for their potential. You were waiting for them to grow. You were waiting for them to choose you with the same depth you choose them. You weren't in love with what the relationship was. You were in love with what you hoped it could become. And letting go means accepting that the version you built in your head is not the one standing in front of you. Almost becomes dangerous when it starts lowering your standards without you realizing it. You start accepting inconsistency as normal. You start labeling effort as too much. You start saying things like, at least they care a little. You start justifying behavior you would never tolerate if you weren't emotionally invested. Almost slowly chips away at your self-worth until you forget that you deserve someone who shows up fully, not someone who shows up halfway. The truth is, walking away from almost is an act of self-respect. It's you choosing clarity over confusion. It's you choosing peace over emotional roller coasters. It's you choosing your future over a cycle you already know the ending to. You don't walk away because you don't care. You walk away because you finally realize that caring isn't enough to fix something that was never built properly to begin with. But here's the part most people miss: walking away doesn't mean you stop loving them. It means you stop sacrificing yourself to keep a connection alive. It means you stop carrying the relationship alone. It means you acknowledge your loneliness within the relationship and decide you deserve a love that doesn't require you to shrink, wait, or beg. Leaving almost creates space for the right person, space for the right timing, space for the right love. It creates room for reciprocity instead of one-sided effort, for emotional safety instead of emotional guessing, for partnership instead of emotional labor. It allows you to step back and see how much life you are losing while trying to convince someone to give you what they weren't willing or capable of giving. And here's the powerful truth: the moment you walk away from almost, you reclaim your self-worth. You stop needing someone to prove your value. You stop living in the gap between who they are and who you hope they'll become. You start choosing yourself, not out of pride, not out of anger, but out of clarity. Almost will always hurt to leave, but staying hurts far more, because staying in almost means staying stuck, staying unseen, staying unfulfilled. Walking away is the moment you finally say, I deserve more than close enough. And that single decision changes the entire trajectory of your life and your relationships.